Welcome back to another episode of the Take Your Shot podcast. Today we've got Rachel Woods on, and she is a marketing and SEO expert. She's got so many years in the industry, and so today I can't wait to have her just talk in depth about like things you can do and ways you can walk away and actually optimize your business today. So Rachel, welcome aboard. Do you mind introducing yourself and telling everyone a little bit more about who you are and just what you do?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. So as you mentioned, my name is Rachel Woods. I own a boutique marketing agency out of Northwest Washington, and I work with small to medium-sized businesses across the country and a couple in Europe. And so I just really, really love working with small businesses and meeting new people. My business is focused predominantly on digital marketing and marketing strategies. So I do paid advertising, web design, a lot of SEO, and then I do some consulting and project management for marketing as well. And my business is relatively new. I've been doing this for about 18 months. I've been in marketing for 20 years. So I just really, really love it. I really love digging into the analytics and doing all of those kind of technical pieces. And so marketing is kind of my nerdy jam. I love it.
I love it too. And you mentioned you do a lot with SEO, which I know is a really big topic, especially we're kind of right now as we're recording, kind of ending through the big, wedding season, and people are going to start updating their website with new images and like all the things. It's kind of that time of year. And so I'm just kind of curious, like, as you've seen it, especially working with like photographers and just businesses in general, like what are some of the bigger mistakes you see people make when it comes to like their website and just especially how it impacts SEO?
Absolutely. Well, there's kind of two big things we have to think about when we think about website SEO. And one of them is the human experience. And we always want to keep that in the forefront. And the second one that is Google's perception of the human experience. So we always want to make sure that our images are loading well, that our customer journey is very clear. Those are pieces that are really important so that when people go to our website, they're able to find the information that they want. They stay on our site. That human experience, of course, is so important. And then there's Google's perception of that. So Google has all of these little check boxes and things that it looks for, basically trying to determine whether Google thinks your website is going to be have a great user experience. And it can make some decisions, as we all know, whether it's going to serve your website in a search result based on its little, check boxes and technical specifications. So when it comes to, your website, Google is predominantly interested in the mobile performance at this point in time, because as we all know, everyone's on mobile devices. Your mobile phone is the predominant way people are usually finding you in search. And so it's really gotten to the point where it really prioritizes that, which makes it harder for industries like photography because you've got images, you've got portfolios, you've got things you want to be showing, and those are going to be harder to load on a mobile device when people are out on their cells, on cellular networks, out in the world. They're not connected to the Wi-Fi, in a building. So for photographers and heavy image sites specifically, it's even harder to have your site be loading and giving a good human experience on mobile, which is Google's predominant measurement stick. So it makes it a little bit harder for those of us in those industries.
Totally. And I think that makes a lot of sense, especially since, a lot of people are using mobile. And so, yeah, if you don't have great Wi-Fi or a good network connection, like that's going to have a huge impact on website traffic. And I see how that would make a sense that Google would focus on that. Now, for people who maybe they've never really thought about this before, but they have a website, like where can they start if they want to audit their website? Like how do they know if their website's good? Like where do they go to check that?
Yeah, it's such a great question. There's a lot of different places to take a look at that. One of my favorite sites for a quick scan is PageSpeed Insights. It's kind of an interesting URL. I can send it to you to put in the show notes. But you can put your URL in there and it does a little audit. And it gives you a lot of great information in terms of your website performance, your SEO best practices, your accessibility. It really tells you kind of at a high level. It does kind of a green, yellow, red stoplight method. And it's a free tool, which makes it really nice. And then it will break down a lot of the specific pieces. One caveat with that is a lot of the recommendations that it gives you are a little bit technical speak, so it can be a little overwhelming in terms of you look at that and you see something like, oh, first contentful paint, what does that mean? So that gives you a really high level look. Another tool that's really fantastic for that is UberSuggest. And UberSuggest is another free tool that you can do similarly, and its breakdown of suggestions are really user-friendly. So I would probably recommend taking a look at both of those. They're going to give you, every tool is going to give you kind of maybe just a little bit different, score. There's nothing that's, an absolute definitive score. Everybody's got their own take on it. But I find that UberSuggest's results are really user-friendly, and you can kind of click on something, it'll explain what it means, and it'll give you, here's the specific pages that maybe you've got things that aren't loading correctly or you've got broken links. So that one's a little more user-friendly, but I do like using both of them.
Totally. Awesome. Well, thanks for that. I think that's awesome that there's like really good tools out there. A lot of them can be free or, have access to like some of the things that just you need to get started. So that's really awesome. Now, someone goes through the audit. What are some of the big things you're seeing? Like, what are the most common like things that are going to get flagged when someone, puts their website through, and, how do we kind of navigate some of those?
Absolutely. So the things that I see a lot, and these are things that really are very easy to address, which is great, right? That's great news that you can easily fix these items. Things like your title tags. UberSuggest is going to tell you if you have title tags that are too short or too long or don't include, they're not great for SEO. You want to think about your keywords in those. Meta descriptions, that's another thing. It's going to say, hey, these pages don't have meta descriptions. That's the information that's going to be showing up in a search result when someone's looking for you. Those are the things that are going to be hopefully getting people to click on your site. So I see a lot of sites that either don't have that information or it's maybe automatically generated from a templated system just saying, hey, we're going to throw your business name on every page. And that's not great for SEO. Another thing that I see a lot are not user-friendly URLs. So if you're blogging, sometimes your blog URLs become these, super, super long, that are the title of your blog post. Those aren't often super user-friendly, things like that. And then when it comes to images, what I see a lot happening is images that are too large, images without alt text, which can hinder your SEO and is also an accessibility issue for people who might be using a screen reader or somebody who's trying to look at your site with some different accessibility tools. And so those are items that are going to get flagged pretty quickly. And those are all things we can fix just going right in your platform. It makes it really nice to know that there's a number of those things that we can just kind of get the list and then just, take a couple hours and chunk those out.
Totally. No, I think that's so good. And, it's good that you just like broke these down. And so if someone sees a lot of this like flagged, if they like go to the performance site and they run their website through, don't be alarmed. There's things you can do to fix these. So do you mind just like talking through like, okay, so someone hears and sees like, oh man, my hero image is way too large or my website is so slow. Like, what are some things that you think are commonly missed on people's websites, and like what can they do to actually like optimize those areas? So maybe like, do you mind just like breaking down some of the different areas and what people can do to optimize?
Absolutely. Yeah. And you mentioned the hero image. So like images specifically are a huge performance killer. So you can oftentimes, we batch edit images, we'll export them for web out of Adobe or, maybe in Canva and we'll think, okay, that makes them small enough to perform well on the website. And that's really not the case anymore. So I always recommend people put every single image through a specific workflow. And as I talk it through, it's going to sound a little bit long, but as you click through it, it goes pretty quick. And the first thing that I always do is I always go in and edit the image to be the specific size that I want it to be. So that, if you are doing a portfolio and it's going to be, say they're going to be, all the images are 400 by 600, or your hero image is going to be a specific size, I go in and make that in Adobe or in Canva, whatever tool you're using, specifically the size that you're looking for. And that just reduces any of the extra bulk that you don't need. I like to, when I create websites, make sure that I'm using kind of a handful of sizes because that makes it quicker if I'm batch creating images or batch editing images. So like all my portfolio images are X size. If I do, something that's got product images, all of those are the same size, trying to think about things that are kind of easy to batch out. And so that's like the first step that I think oftentimes is just a quick one that you can check off. Then I export all of those images at web resolution. So you still want to do that. You still want to think about but reducing the resolution of those down as you're exporting those out of Adobe or whatnot. And then something that I think is really important, and this is an easy thing to forget, things get exported out of Adobe and it's like image, maybe it's like wedding date, the date is XYZ _4 or whatever. It's some kind of like, miscellaneous thing that maybe makes sense from your filing system. But I recommend you rename all of your images for SEO. So instead of, April 4th, 2004, think about maybe destination wedding or destination wedding photography, and then, adding something. So thinking about what are some keywords that you're trying to rank for specifically on that page and adding those into the name of your image. It's an easy thing to skip, but it actually is something that helps Google recognize like, oh, we're trying to think about destination weddings and you're using that in other places on the page. And then this is the big one. I use a tool called Tinify, or it's tinypng.com. And so we take all of those images and we compress them further. So Tinify will actually let you drag in bulk. So you don't have to one by one your images. You can drag a bunch of them in and it will compress all of them in at one time. And the thing I love about TinyPNG, one, it's free, right? So we all love a free tool. They don't change your SEO names. So I've used other tools that you go through all the trouble of getting all your SEO names specific, and then it spits it out after it compressed, and it's now like garbly gook, blah, blah, blah. And you're thinking, well, great. Thanks for that. That was not helpful. So they let you drag and drop. They let you retain your SEO names. And they also, not only do they compress the images, but they'll let you compress and then also change to the optimal web file. So if you are using like WordPress, you can convert using TinyPNG into all of your images can go into a WebP format, which is the optimal format for website images. Unfortunately, not all platforms let you use WebP, which is kind of a bummer. So WebP is great if you can use it in WordPress. A lot of the platforms like your Wix, your Showit, your, Squarespace, I recommend JPEGs. They often compress smaller than PNGs. Unless you need the PNG, obviously, to have a transparent background, then you can use PNGs. But thinking about what is the lowest file size, the most compressed version of that image, and making sure that you're using that. And that's not going to lose your resolution. So your images are still going to be crisp. They're as strong as they were when they came out of Adobe, but they're going to compress down, so they're going to load faster on your site. And so once you've done that, once you've made them the correct size, you've exported them at web resolution, you named them for SEO, and then you've compressed them, now they're ready to go into your website. And that's going to give you the maximum performance for loading, particularly on mobile. If you're able to upload a smaller version on a mobile site, then that gives you even more usability. So it sounds like a lot, but it really only is another step or two before it really makes a huge difference.
Totally. I love how you just like broke that down, because I think, again, this is something where we're just being intentional, right? We're being intentional with our websites. We're trying to be intentional with trying to make sure it doesn't go unseen because everything loads too slowly. So I think that makes a lot of sense. And so, yeah, the fact that that's like a big thing too. Like if your website's not going to load fast, it's probably one of the biggest things Google's going to look at in terms of whether or not it's going to show. Because how much time do you have before someone bounces? Like you have like a millisecond, I think. Like if it doesn't load, people are already impatient and they already are now with a bad impression, of you because your website's slow. So thanks for doing that. You also mentioned, the alt text. I know you talked a little bit about accessibility, things like that, and like title tags, things like that. Do you mind like just giving people a brief overview if they've never heard those terms before and kind of like what it would look like to optimize those areas as well?
Absolutely. So I think I recall that you've had a podcast episode talking about keyword research. So if you have done some of that keyword research and you kind of have a list of the keywords that you're looking for, that's the first step, right? And so what we then do is we want to take a keyword for each page and then think about all the different places that we can be using that in the page. So your title tag is going to be When you look at the little tab on your browser, you can see the title tag is listed up there. When you Google your pages, it's sort of the headline on the page itself. And the meta description is sort of the smaller text below it. So those are typically in your kind of either, I'm thinking in WordPress, they're typically down below the website content block as you're typing your content in your page. There's usually a block below that will say, your site might say page title or your site in title. In Show It, some of those, they're in like an advanced SEO area. But being really intentional about naming those pages. So thinking about a name for your page, your title tag that includes that keyword that you're looking for. Same with the meta description. Thinking about making sure that your meta descriptions are under 155 characters. Things like that are kind of important too, to think about the size. I can send you a little list of kind of like what are your character sizes for each one of those areas. And so typically, if you are in your website, your dashboard, and you're like, I don't know where to look, you might just Google and be like, Squarespace, edit your meta description. And it'll start to tell you, okay, this is how you go in and update those places. But thinking about those specifically, and the same thing with your alt text for your images. What you want to do is make sure your alt text for your image is really descriptive, because you're thinking about people's screen readers, people who are trying to understand the image if they're not able to see it. It also is something that can come up if your site isn't quite loading correctly. It'll give you that alt text. But you can also, again, think about keywords. So you might think about ways to describe your image accurately while also including, keywords in that. So it might be bride and groom at a destination wedding, things like that, if that's your keyword that you're looking for. So being accurate, but also thinking again, how can I tuck in those keywords into all of those opportunities? And one more thing that's important to think about is your headline structure. So thinking about kind of that biggest headline, including the keywords in that as well. And then also not only in your body text, but any of the any of the headlines that you have under that. Sometimes we call those like an H2. It's kind of like a secondary headline, or maybe something that's a little bit below that. Thinking about having keywords in those as well, because Google's kind of looking at your page, trying to understand what's this information. It can't actually see the page the way that we see it. So it's going to be looking at what's the title of the page, in the meta description, what are we kind of saying this page is about? As I scan the page, what are the headlines? What are the keywords? Am I seeing destination wedding here a lot in the content, in the headlines, in the images? It starts to kind of look at all of these key areas. And as it starts to see that, it goes, okay, this page is about destination weddings. When someone's Googling that, then this might be something to bring up for them.
I love that. No, I think there's, so many different pieces of the page, and Google isn't a human. I like how you described it earlier as their assumption, or how they think the human experience is, like their interpretation of that. And yeah, so I think it's just so good to just be really intentional with all these little things. Is there anything else when it comes to just like optimizing your pages, making sure that, everything is set and good to go, that I think it's really good for our listeners to maybe like go ahead and audit on their website?
Yeah, absolutely. I always recommend that you limit the amount of large images on your site, a lot of large banners, large headers. If you are going to use a video, say maybe on the front page of your desktop website, think about using a static image on your mobile, because again, your mobile is going to have a harder time loading it no matter what's going on. So thinking about a really beautiful static image on mobile, it's a video on your desktop. Thinking about if you are using large banner images and you're using them on different pages, there's a little snippet of code that you can put in your header that will preload that image. So that's another thing that kind of tells the website as it's loading to like, hey, bring that up first. And that will help you with your overall page load speed. You always want to use that sparingly, right? Because if you say, okay, load all of them first, then nothing's loading first. But that is something that I utilize a lot when I do websites with header images, is have that kind of preload. And then just thinking about being really strategic of all the different areas that you have, to be using that keyword content. I think that's just a really big piece of that. And then the other thing to think about is if you are, auditing for your SEO, if you're auditing and looking for those tools, one of the other things I always recommend is people check regularly for broken links. And there's a broken link checker that you can, another free tool, and UberSuggest will tell you, hey, you've got either broken links on this page, or it might say, hey, this page is giving you what's called a 404 error. So that's meaning your page isn't loading when those URLs are coming up. Those pages aren't loading correctly, or they're not loading based on the URL that their people are visiting. And so those are things that you want to be scanning for regularly as well. Because as we move things, as if we're linking out to other people's websites and they change something, now that link is broken, that's just one more thing that you can make sure is giving a great human experience. And then Google will be like, oh yeah, great human experience, no broken links. That Google likes that quite a bit. So it's a lot to think about, but if you kind of keep a little checklist and maybe every quarter take a look on those scans, you can just do a lot of good that way for your site.
Totally. And so for someone, if they see a broken link, like how do they know how to fix that? Is it because the page is deleted, or like, I know obviously like sometimes the title changes or things like that. Like what should they do when they find a broken link?
Yeah, and it depends on, so if you have, say, blogs and you've gone out to say, here's 3 of my favorite, wedding venues, for example, and you're clicking on those links and that link is no longer going to where it needs to go. Or if a scan has said, hey, there's broken links on this page. There's a couple things you can do. You can just maybe go back to the maybe if it's your favorite venue, for example, you can go back to their website and be like, hey, what's the correct link for this? Or you can pull it back. So maybe it was a page within the site, and then you go, well, I'm just going to send them to the main part of the site. It might be something where maybe it's a business that's gone out of business, or if it's a site if it's a link that you can't fix in terms of you can't find the right site, you might have to just delete it. You wouldn't want something to just be sitting on the site, but that's something to be, just kind of go back into that content and fix those and relink them. If you have pages that are not, they're loading 404 errors. So that's saying, hey, when someone comes to this page, it's loading a 404. That means that the link that's out in the world is coming to your site and your site is not loading that page. So that might be something where your URL has changed. Maybe you did some SEO work and you put in a new great, URL. What you want to think about then is making sure that you add what's called a redirect. And that means you're telling your website, when someone asks for this page, I actually want you to load this other page. And that's something that, again, different platforms handle that differently, but there's typically a way or a place where you go and say, when people ask for this page, actually load this other page. And I recommend, and I know a lot of people that work in SEO, we say anytime that you update a URL, always go in and add a redirect right there. Don't wait for it to load a 404. Just think about that as part of your process. If you're changing a URL, add a redirect right in that moment.
I love that. I think that's so great. Awesome. Well, okay. I feel like we talked through so much. We went really in the weeds here with just like optimization and image sizes and so many things. Is there any tangible next steps or things that you would like to leave our listeners with before we wrap up today?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think one of the things would be to not be overwhelmed when you run through these scans. I don't know that anybody, probably somebody, but I would say there's really very few people in the world who run those scans and it's like 100% perfection. Everything's amazing. So I would say try not to be overwhelmed by that information. One of the things that I do a lot, I have a blog on my website and I post a lot of articles that kind of break down things like this kind of one by one. So like that image workflow, I have a blog post that just sort of walks through like, this is how I do that. Or, here's the top 5 things I see in website audits. So I absolutely invite folks to come to my website, woodsmarcom.com, click on the blog, and you can kind of look through and kind of get some of those free tips and resources. I also have a newsletter that I send out twice a month that kind of has some of that stuff in it as well. And I also have an SEO, like a SEO toolkit freebie on my website, and you can get to it by woodsmarcom.com/SEO toolkit. And that'll actually is a tool that lets you kind of break down, like, here's every page of my website. Here's what the title tags are. Here's what the meta descriptions are. And it has all those kind of character limits. So it kind of walks you through, if you're going to update those pieces, like kind of how to do that, and gives you kind of a framework to kind of lay that out and see it. And then the other thing too is if you look through and you're like, oh my gosh, I have to just really rework all of these images, I would say just kind of maybe think of that in chunks of time of you can go back through and do all of your images through that workflow and then just like replace them on your website. If you find that you're like, my entire portfolio is not loading very well, you can just kind of go through and replace all of those images and maybe chunk it out over, a piece of time. So just kind of find ways to keep it manageable as we're also trying to run businesses and photograph weddings and do all these other pieces. So absolutely.
Totally awesome. Well, seriously, thank you so much for just all your time today, Rachel. Like, you've given us so much value, so many things to think about. For people who want to connect more with you or potentially work with you, like where can they find you and what types of things you offer?
Absolutely. Thank you. Well, my website, woodsmarcom.com. I have a lot of great resources there and you can reach out to me there. I'm on Instagram at woodsmarcom, and I'm also on LinkedIn as Rachel A. Woods in a bright pink shirt. So it kind of stands out in the search. And so, yeah, absolutely follow me on any kind of social media and then reach out to me there. I do a lot of SEO work. I do a lot of audits, and then I do a lot of here's your audit and then here's our action plan, and then can go back into websites and like make all of those updates for you. I do paid advertising, particularly, Google click ads if you've got paid meta, things like that to kind of really reach your target audience. And I do some web design as well. I keep it more on the basic side just to kind of keep with my other services that can absolutely do that as well. So would love to reach out and, chat with me and then absorb, of course, all the free tips and tools, because I'm really love doing a lot of that of just sort of like, how can we help other small businesses with all of these pieces that can feel overwhelming, but if you kind of break it up, it makes it a little more manageable.
I love that. And that's exactly what we're here for, is just to help business owners make things a little less overwhelming, give them the resources they need, at least to get started and really help out. So seriously, Rachel, thank you so much for joining us today. And for everyone listening, we'll see you guys next week.
Thank you so much.